goes two ways. And I think that the candidates should be able to have an experience with us and so we show our authentic selves so they know what they're getting into. And that is, can I see myself here? Is this a group of people that I'm going to invest my professional life with? And sometimes it crosses it over, right? That our inseparableness between our personal and professional. But yeah, so I think it's a two-way. It's very bi-directional, I believe, in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go ahead and extend this over to Dr. Visco. I'm just going down my list of panelists here, and Dr. Visco, based on what you're hearing with this job process and some of the requirements, what have you experienced either as a panelist that's looked for a new assistant or associate professor, or based on your own experience? What have you seen?
Well, I think hearing from Dr. Turner, I'm actually the newest professor because I got my position in March of 2020.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
Because I received my PhD this May. So I am very familiar with the the more recent happenings of getting my position. Luckily, it happened before the COVID outbreak. But what both Dr. Turner and Dr. Evans have said is kind of right on. It's a lot about getting out in front of trying to find a position. As Dr. Turner alluded to, when she started in January, most people would say that was kind of late, and it really is, because I know when I was, I was basically working on my proposal for my dissertation, and my professors were like, "You need to start applying now." And it was very adamant, So those people who are out there who are in this, the participants that are watching this, I would say, if you guys have not started looking, if you know you're going to graduate in January or in May, you should be putting out applications now and looking for places to go now, because otherwise you're falling behind. There's going to be less positions, kind of available as you go. And Dr. Turner, she's right. Getting that position, applying in January and getting the position so quickly is fantastic. That's amazing. And Dr. Evans is also very correct. When you go and visit these colleges, because they'll call you and ask you, you'll get a phone call interview, and then if you're lucky enough, they'll call you for an on-campus interview, and you have to go to these campuses. And a lot of it is about finding a place where you fit. It's not just about finding a job. It's finding a place where you are going to want to spend time and interact with these people, and interact with with your colleagues, and be part of the community. And if you don't see yourself being at that place, it's not really a great fit, then that's not for you. But you have to make those decisions yourself. I went on a couple of different interviews, and when I looked back on it, I was really happy that Akron offered me the position, because I was I'm a city person. I'm originally from New York. Akron is kind of a big city. They'll call it a big city in Ohio. But it's a city, and it's right by Cleveland. And it was definitely something that I was very comfortable with, and I was comfortable with the people. And it felt like it felt like home to me. And the people there were I was very comfortable with. And that's something I would encourage you all when you go on these interviews is be yourself. Don't try and be someone else. Don't try and put on a facade, because you want them to know the real you, just like you want to know the real them.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And that really gets after what Dr. Evans was talking about regarding that authenticity. I want to go over to Dr. Young now and kind of get her take on the process that you've either experienced or been a part of in what you look for in potential candidates coming into your department. What have you seen, Dr. Young?
So first of all, something that the other panelists have touched on as far as like the timeline of the job market, I think that's super important. There's an expression, and it goes, you're most marketable 6 months before and 6 months after you graduate, meaning the year of your graduation, like that you're dissertating, and then the year after. Between the 2 years, in my experience, and with the students I work with especially, that second year, you're more marketable because you have more scholarly products, right? In theory. Some of those papers have started to be accepted or published. You have more presentations, you finish your dissertation, you're able to transition some of those, some of that work into other scholarly products, etc. But in actuality, you need to attempt both job market cycles. It's not impossible to get a job after that period of time, but that is when you're most likely to get a job. With respect to
Excuse me, Microsoft Word needs your attention.
Excuse me, Siri. But with respect to going on the market itself, it's been my experience, especially as a person of color, especially as a woman of color, that we have to be very careful in how we navigate politically these spaces. And so from the moment you step foot, I tell people it's the moment you step foot on the plane, right? When you're going to a physical job talk, and the way you present yourself during a Skype interview, those things matter. It's not by happenstance that these things happen. And so understanding like the process, but also the politics are very important. So for instance, when I say process, most jobs in education, especially in teacher education, ed leadership, et cetera, they open up kind of in October, November-ish, and many of those calls close in December, January. There are all kinds of variations of position announcements. And I think especially amidst COVID, we're going to see a lot more deviation from that traditional timeline. And we saw that this past summer. I've never seen so many students get jobs in a summer. I mean, the process started, the first initial, we're interested in a Skype interview started in June, and they were hired in July. I've never in my career seen so many situations happen like that. And my hope and guess is that we'll see a lot more deviation from the process, but still understanding it is important. If your job market materials are due in October, you should be asking your recommenders for their letters at the end of the spring semester prior to that time. And the way that you ask them for a letter and what you provide to them as context. All of those things, process matters. And then again, the politics of how we present ourselves on the market also matters.
And you hit on a variety of themes there when we're talking about the politics of the process, how it differs, between the colleges and universities that we apply to, the timelines, and when you couple all of this stuff into the ball that everybody has to kind of has to take down the court, it can likely create a lot of anxiety and be just an angst-driven process. And I'm interested in how you all kind of managed that anxiety and navigated the angst, and what advice you would give to our attendees who are looking at this saying, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what to do. I'm worried. I've got to move. I've got to put together an application. What are some anxiety management methods that you all have used, and maybe you continue to use in your everyday lives to kind of get after managing these concerns? Go ahead and open that up to any of the panelists that want to chime in on that.
I can speak to that a little bit. I always tell my students, and especially when they get ready to go on a physical job talk, I tell them that you have to remember, in most instances, 95% of the time, nobody knows more about what you're talking about than you do, right? You are truly the expert when you come on campus about what it is that you're talking about. And nobody knows your research more thoroughly than you do. And so I think having that bit of confidence, confidence and arrogance are very different, but having that bit of confidence as you kind of go through the process and having some practice with that, practice interactions. Another thing I don't know who's a GA among our attendees, but if you're a graduate assistant of any sort and you have the opportunity to sit, valuable things you can do as a graduate student. And so take advantage of those opportunities, kind of assert yourself. If you see them, someone says, we're going to have a new position, job search for whatever, right? And it's even somewhat related to what you do, or it's just in your department. Reach out to your chair, your department chair, or your program chair, or your dissertation chair, and say, I'm preparing to go on the market. I would love the experience of being on that committee. Don't wait for them to pick someone that they want to pick, because that becomes very political. And getting on that committee, you will learn more than any webinar will ever teach you. I promise you that. And that can kind of, I won't say ease your anxiety, but put things in perspective.
Yeah, it sounds like if you assert yourself and you become part of the process, you begin to see kind of the behind the scenes look at how it works. And that could absolutely, reduce your anxiety because you kind of know what to expect. And with the acknowledgement, of course, that it's different from location to location, but it gives you a much, much more in-depth perspective.
Can I give an example of that?
Please.
What I mean by that is, I think students think that they sit down with every person's packet, lay all the materials out. Everybody stands, someone stands up and writes on a whiteboard, write the person's name and map out everything, and then score them on this big rubric. And that, this whole 2-hour long process to review your materials. And a lot of times it's a student worker, an administrative assistant, someone put these stacks of papers together and they go through the first page of the Vita. This is a literacy position, not literacy, never heard of that university before, not literacy. And they, yes, no stack goes from 100 applicants down to like 10 or down to 20 in a matter of minutes, right? So every university is very different procedurally, but just seeing like what people think, what things are said, those nuanced aspects of the job search process, there's no webinar that will teach you those things, and you carry them with you as you go through your own job search process. So I'm telling you, if you're writing things down, like things to do, try to get on a search committee.
I can tell you I've taken that mental note to heart. Absolutely.
Well, and I would piggyback on what Dr. Young is saying. One of the things you can really do is make sure you read the call for whatever job it is you're applying for. Because as Dr. Young was saying, like, this is a literary position. You don't have literacy, don't apply for that, right? Like, make sure you're reading specifically the job, because it's going to be one of those things where it either aligns with who you are or doesn't align with who you are. And Dr. Young's right. They will, a grad assistant's going to go through that real quick and be like, yes, this person does fulfill the requirements, or no, they don't. And once they get down to those 20, then they can start splitting hairs on it. But it can get down to that 20 very quickly. So make sure you're applying for things that actually fit your criteria.
Absolutely. And Dr. Evans, did you want to piggyback on that as well?
One of the things I've been thinking about is how important it is for the candidate to know the city within which they are applying and the campus, and taking some time to do some of that front loading of and getting to know, what are ways you could connect your research? How can you connect your future students in higher ed to some of the things in the community? So really knowing what to be able to speak to your opportunities shows through. And your colleagues sitting there, your future or potential colleagues sitting there in the search committee are going to say, wow, this is somebody who's investing, for example, in Milwaukee, it's endless. And of those opportunities of networking and of knowing in the city and really looking into that, taking some time to do that. And I think spending time on your presentation with that shows that you would be somebody that would fit in very well there.
Okay.
Lastly, I just want to say something. There are things that you might, after you're done with your interviewing and things like that, are you going, oh, why did I say that? Know that we've all been there. and there's always going to be things that you wish you would have included in that. But taking it light on yourself and knowing that that's just part of the process. Those things happen.
I think that goes back to a theme that even we've seen right now in the as we've transitioned into this virtual environment, which is showing ourselves grace. That's very important in terms of managing our angst and our internal concerns and our mental health. Dr. Turner, did you want to add anything?
Well, sure. 'Cause one of the things I would totally echo what they've already said, because when I would go through the ads and I was like, okay, well, I don't do this. I don't know how to do that. But then I focused on what my experiences were. And then how could I highlight what my experiences were? I've been in ECE or early childhood education for 30 years. And so that way, when it came down to it, I knew what I needed to look for. But then my focus in school was on social foundations of education. So then those are the two focuses that I knew that I would, I think I could shine in. So I made sure when I wrote my letters that I focused on that, I highlighted that. Then even when I went to the interview, I made sure I didn't just mention early childhood education, but I also made sure that I mentioned about diversity and about those, in that area. And from my experience, that's what they were looking for. So it was perfect because they were looking for that and let me go backwards too. You guys talked about the importance of when you do go to an interview, seeing how you guys mesh. And that was one of the things, because even right now, we're a team. And that started out with that first interview. Right now, I probably get like 20 or 30 text messages because they're so close to each other. And so we know about each other's kids and families and everything like that. And every group might not be like that, but at our college, in our department, that's how close they are. So it's important, like you said, that they get to know you, even that little bit in that interview. So they're like, okay, I could work with her. I could actually give her my phone number. I don't know if I want, you don't want it to be like, I don't know about her. But yeah, it's just, I agree, where it's make sure that you're you, you're authentic, you're you. And then with those letters, whatever else, make sure that you highlight and focus on your strengths. And like Dr. Visco said, if you don't know how to do it, don't even apply for it, if it's not something in your experience or your background.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point, because that goes directly to the community of research that I think most institutions are trying to get after, and reduce potential friction points from the outset. And this really goes to kind of a follow-up question to the process and in managing your angst. And as we begin our research process for these potential jobs, where have you all traditionally gone to either post these positions or to find these positions? And I think everybody or most people are probably familiar with was it the Inside Higher Ed Jobs or the jobs board on jobs in higher ed? But are there other locations that you all post and whatnot? I'll go ahead and open that up to the whole panel there.
Well, I'll just say some of the places that I looked. First of all, the ones that you did mention, I was looking in those. But then, like I said, LinkedIn, then the American Association of Blacks in Higher Education. I'd never heard of that one. I was like, okay, I found that one. And then even Facebook groups. Now there's a Facebook group called Black Women in Higher Education, and they're always advertising. I won't say always, but they're putting it out there if people are available. And I just wanted to mention those two because those were two that I had never heard of before, but then wanted to check those out, and they were very beneficial.
I think sometimes we forget about leveraging our social media networks because there's so many groups out there with thousands of members that will sometimes post jobs before they're even posted in some of the traditional forums, like one of our attendees is posting higheredjobs.com, and of course from the Chronicle of Higher Education. Are there any other locations that you all have traditionally posted or you found positions? Go ahead, Dr. Evans.
Yeah, so we were very successful. We sent it to the listservs, AERA SIGs that were pertinent to the early childhood ed program and the critical perspectives in early childhood. So we did that, and so that's another a place to seek out really experienced, talented candidates. So we looked at some of those places and membership affiliations. We did do some local, like MilwaukeeJobs.com, but did expand it to the wider. So so looked at our divisions and SIGs at AERA.
So I think that is a good opportunity to make a plug. Be sure to join the SIGs that you are interested in, and to also, this is membership season, so be sure to update your AERA membership if you haven't already. Anyone else want to add in on that, where you have found or posted positions? Okay. What I want to do now is go ahead and take a question from the audience before we slide into the formal Q&A here in about 10 minutes or so. Let's go ahead and take a question from the audience. Brooke, do you have one that you'd like to throw out to us?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone that has been posting questions. We've got about 10 of them, actually. So I wanted to do one that maybe a lot of people are thinking through, and it says, I'm wondering if you have any tips for people that are not geographically flexible. How do you make the most of looking and applying for jobs in a relatively small region?
It's a big question. Anybody want to tackle that one first?
So that's a really hard thing to do if you're going to be very geographically unflexible. Is hard in this profession, is what I've learned, because I know that my wife was not super happy about me getting a job in Ohio, because she's lived in Texas and Florida her whole life, and so moving anywhere cold is not her excitement. But not only that, I have a stepson who is a junior this year in high school, and she did not want to move him his junior year of high school. And so, right now I'm living separate from my family in Ohio, and they're in Texas, and it's very hard to be away. But I knew that I couldn't be geographically inflexible. I had to be as flexible as I can, because I had to have a job. And so I think that, obviously I would have tried to get a job in Texas if I could, but jobs are very hard to come by, and specific jobs for education, depending on what your certain field is, can be harder than others. And so mine was not a very, there was not a lot of jobs open for secondary English ed. And so it made it a lot harder to pinpoint. And I made the decision to not be inflexible. I made the decision to be flexible. So, I mean, I know that doesn't really answer your question of what to do, but you may be looking a lot longer than you think if you're just confined to a small space.
And I think this kind of goes after the dichotomy between the types of jobs that we tend to focus on. With flexibility comes more opportunity, but it also requires us to maybe relook our expectations. I mean, do we look at possible adjunct positions in certain areas? Do we look at online teaching positions, because maybe there's going to be a proliferation of online teaching opportunities? Dr. Turner, I saw that you had your mic. Go ahead. What are you thinking?
Well, I was very inflexible. So I did start out looking for online positions, and I was actually an adjunct for years. So I was like, okay, I'll just adjunct. But I was like, nope, I want to do the real thing. And so, but I started out looking, I went to the, I was going to say phone book, showing my age, but I found out every college and university that was within a certain realm, certain mileage. And I said, I'm going to find out. And then I actually started looking at their websites as opposed to just the different places to look. And so I looked and looked and looked. So actually, besides COVID, I drive 3 hours round trip because of my inflexibility. And so I work in Madison, but I actually live in Milwaukee. And so that's a nice little distance. And that was what I could find. And so that inflexibility does affect you. I mean, 3 hours round trip, that's not a small thing, at least not to me. Some people, maybe it's nothing, but that's a lot.
Yeah, inflexibility versus flexibility. That goes back to the types of opportunities that might be available or won't be, depending on what you're willing to kind of get after. Dr. Evans, I saw that you unmuted your mic. Did you want to follow up with anything?
Well, no, I was going to say that if you have some regional sort of restrictions, thinking maybe a little unconventionally, like what could it look like? And I think you sort of mentioned it. I was just going to say we're in an era of some online developments, and we're learning a lot about how we can accomplish this work in innovative ways. So there might be, the pathway might be a pathway of going a little more unconventionally and seeing what you might be able to put together for yourself.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. Getting unconventional, looking at what the changing market and staying abreast, most of all, of what the market is evolving into. I'm going to go ahead and look back over here at some of our questions that I sent in for your all's consideration not too long ago. One of the questions that I had on there, this was the very last one, is, hey, what should you not do? There are we could talk about things that you should do all day. And I think that there are plenty of resources, even outside the context of this webinar, that can really inform that. And you all have done a phenomenal job. But I know that you all also have personal and professional examples of what you shouldn't do in terms of the application process and in terms of the interview process. I would love to hear either stories or vignettes or, just a simple listicle of things that you should not do. I'll open that up to you all.
If I can just go back for a second to the last question about being geographically tethered.
Please do.
If you are, because we have a lot of people in Texas here who they feel they have to stay in Texas. And so what I advise people to do as much as possible, if you're geographically tethered, then you need to be geographically centered, right? So those neighboring institutions, if they have a special event or a conference that comes, or any kind of networking opportunities, or an organization that is funneled through that department, go to those things, show your face. Don't wait until the year of the job search. You should be doing that throughout your doctoral program, and you'll start to build networks. People will start to remember your face and your name, right? Volunteer at the registration desk at that conference at another institution, and people will be like, well, who is that, right? So making those strong impressions and building the networks, a lot of times it's not what you know, it's who you know. That can go a long way with in instances where you're geographically tethered. But to answer this question about don'ts, I mean, when I'm thinking about, for instance, there's so many don'ts, from the application process to the Skype interview to email communication to the job talk to negotiations. So I think I'll just take one, like the Skype interview process. That is generally not a time to ask about salary during the Skype interview. Very bad time to ask about salary. And I think that would kind of throw people off. If I heard someone ask about salaries on a Skype interview, I think I'd be thrown off. And I know it's kind of, it seems counterintuitive. Like, why would you put me through this whole process? And why would I go through this whole process and I don't know what the salary is? But you can, if it's a public university, most of them, it's public information. Like, you can look up everyone's salary and get an idea of what an assistant professor or clinical lecturer, et cetera, would be paid. So that's not the time to ask. It's also not the time to be too sarcastic or funny. Being funny or sarcastic face-to-face is very different than being sarcastic and funny online. And maybe some of y'all have seen that with everyone being Zoom here recently. But that type of interaction is not always well received via Zoom or Skype. So I wouldn't advise that. I always, for the Skype Zoom interview in particular, I always tell people like, don't be late, but don't be early. Because I've been in instances, not myself, but where I was on a search committee where someone showed up 10 minutes early, knowing that we're doing Zoom interviews that day. Well, they entered, and that was whoever set this up messed up, but they entered the room while the other person was in there. And I think it psyched them out, right? So you want to show up, be ready 5 minutes before, open the room 3 minutes before your interview. And certainly don't be late. Make sure your technology works. Other things I say don't have a script. I don't know where that logic or thinking comes from, but even a layperson can tell when something is scripted. So you want to speak genuinely, and your ability to speak well is very much part of what we do as academicians. So it's really the wrong place, the wrong time, the wrong setting to be scripting anything. Don't rehearse answers, because a lot of times people will tell you, well, they'll ask you what your, interview questions are. What's your strength? What is your area of weakness? Tell me, give me a 30-second overview of your research agenda. Well, those are categorical questions, but they don't always present that way. The question is not what is your area of weakness, but what is something that you've learned in the last year, right? And then you answer it with your weakness, and it's a mismatch because you rehearsed your answer. And then the last thing, don't try to be someone else. I could keep going.
No, I mean, I definitely requested a listicle, and lo and behold, you delivered. And there's such brilliant points, Dr. Young, and I feel like it goes directly back to what Dr. Evans said at the very beginning. Be natural. It goes back to if you're not able to talk about who you are after 3-4 years of doctoral training and research and possibly teaching in that time, then there's a concern there. Anybody else want to talk about things to consider? I think let me go with Dr. Visco and then Dr. Evans. Okay.
I would say one don't that I made the mistake of. Don't assume you know what time zone it is, because the University of Akron had a phone interview for me set up at 2:00, and so I was like, oh, great. Unfortunately, it was 2:00 Eastern time, and Texas is not Eastern time. And so when they called me, I was in the middle of a Walmart buying stuff for my daughter, and I had to answer the phone in Walmart and make it not seem like I was in Walmart, and try and walk to my car and I had planned out I was going to have it in my office. I was going to be nice and comfortable, and instead I had to leave a Walmart in the downpouring rain, running through puddles. And I did the interview in my car, curled up, soaking wet, which actually turned out to be beneficial, because when I wrote them an email saying, hey, I'm sorry if I was a little distracted. I was in my car because I didn't understand that it was an Eastern time. And they were like, wow, you did a really good job for someone in their car. So I guess it worked out okay, because here I am with the position. But and so from that point on, whenever I had an interview, I'm like, what time zone is that again? So just make sure that you have your time zones figured out.
That's so I don't usually take the moral of the story, but I guess the moral of the story is you too can become a professor at the University of Akron by an interview in a Walmart parking lot. Dr. Evans, go ahead.
So I was going to say, one of the things that I was trying to make it a don't, but it keeps coming out a do. I guess take care. Don't get caught up in what might be something that you feel like you're lacking. If a question comes your way and you may not understand it, or you have not heard of it, I think that it's always a good idea to flip it to something that you could say, that sounds very interesting. That seems like an area of growth for me, so that you you recognize that maybe it's not something that you are aware of or don't know about in depth, but that you would be willing to, if in fact you are, to learn more about it and make that an area of growth for yourself. So doing that flip from the negative. Sometimes those negative questions are strategically placed for you. Or and then the other thing is when the question is asked, I can't turn this into a don't, it's a do. Be sure to focus on what's being asked, because you may have an agenda and that you want to make sure people that you tell people, but the questions that are being asked are for a reason. And the last thing you would want to happen is for the search committee to then say, I'm not sure we ever found out the philosophy of integrating this work or whatever. So be very cognizant of that, and don't forget. Lastly, just don't forget your humility, and it shows through when someone's humble, and it's nice to work with a colleague who can come across in that way.
Yeah, that's such wonderful advice. And one of the things that I took away from that, Dr. Evans, was to be flexible, and don't go in there with your own agenda necessarily, other than to present the best version of yourself. So what great advice. Dr. Turner.
I would totally have to agree with all of you, but Dr. Evans, one of the things when I remember when I was interviewing, and they seemed like they kept asking the same question different ways. So then I was thinking, should I make up something, or should I, but I just kept saying the same thing. I said, you know what? I only answer I have is, and I would say that pretty much the same response. And they told me later on, that's what they were looking for. They weren't looking for me to, do something different or make something up, but because one of the things I kept talking about, the importance of relationships when it comes to in early childhood education. Then they would ask me a different question. I was like, well, it comes down to relationships. And so I was like, forget it. If I don't get the job, but I'm going to be real and give what my real answer is. And so they said that's what got it, because I was, so be you. And so I guess that's not a don't, but well, okay, don't make up things. Just be you and answer how you would really respond.
What wonderful advice from our panel here in terms of what not to do. Thank you all so much. What I want to do now is turn our conversation back over to Q&A and take a couple more questions before we wrap up our webinar for the evening. So Brooke, do you have a question for us?
Yeah, I have a great question here. An attendee asked, how do you shape a coherent research agenda if you've worked on multiple research projects and or have several research interests? So again, how do you shape a coherent research agenda if you've worked on multiple projects and have several research interests?
Sounds like that goes to being an interdisciplinary minded person. How do you all navigate that, or what do you all look at when you see a candidate that's kind of interdisciplinary and maybe transdisciplinary in their research focus? Yeah, Dr. Evans, go ahead.
So I would say when a candidate comes and they say there are 3 strands that I'm interested in, and they can very coherently talk about the strands, but I would also suggest taking some time to create a visual on where the connections might be. And that's incredibly helpful when you're listening to someone for the first time, to see this, that they've thought out. And maybe there's not an easy connection, but take some time to think about that. And that graphic or that visual is really helpful for people.
And maybe that also make that connection to kind of the research focus of the department that you're applying to, and say, hey, this is how my research agenda kind of correlates to what you all are doing here and how we can enable one another. Somebody else want to add in?
I would just say I agree with what you just said, because that's one of the things I said. I work in early childhood education and as well as with diversity. And so I was able to show them that, this is what's important. Even when I did the teaching demonstration, it was dealing with children and diversity, and come to find out, like I said, that's what they were looking for, but I was able to tie those together for what they were looking for.
Well, that's absolutely outstanding, and I think that goes back to what our collective ability as researchers should be, is being able to merge ideas together and build on other ideas effectively. All right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can carry it. Go ahead, Dr. Young.
Is it possible to share my screen?
Let's see here. You should have share capabilities. Brooke, are you
Agreed. Yes.
okay?
Um, let's share this real quick. It's missing. So this is a sample of just speaking to the having like an illustration. This is what I have because I am an interdisciplinary scholar.
Dr.
And
Young, can anyone see it? I can't
Nope.
see it.
okay, sorry. Can you see that?
There we go. Yep, we can see it now.
So I am an interdisciplinary scholar as a multicultural educator. And you can see here, I have this model. I call it the 5 pillars of success, or pillars of excellence, promoting success of Black women and girls. And you can see, I don't know why there's supposed to be captions down here, but it's supposed to say pedagogy, policy, positionality, programs, and there's another P. But there are 5 Ps that should be down here. And this is kind of my graphic. So when I explain it to people, I explain that if you look at my beta, every single line item from the title of my dissertation on the front page to my service at the end, you will see connections to at least one of these different strands and how they align. So the visual, remember I just said, like, don't try to be someone else. Don't try to create something extremely similar or one that's just aesthetically appealing that doesn't make sense. Like my pillars, like logistically, aesthetically, logically make sense for me. And you need to do whatever type of illustration or graphic or picture or whatever it may be. It may be a story, right? That helps to capture like what you do and why you do it. And I put another example of here of why you don't want to try to be someone else. So as an associate professor, I have another thing, which is my research agenda timeline. And it's in 3 phases. And this is really assistant professor, associate professor in full. I would never share this with somebody if I was an assistant professor, because my trajectory may not be in line with the university's trajectory for me. Does that make sense? And so again, don't just, you see something like, oh, that looks like a good idea, let me, mimic it. That's not how this works. It's about things being meaningful and purposeful and necessary. But yes, I would echo the same, have some type of illustration or graphic or visual or story or something that helps to capture what you do. Just trying to talk about it in 60 seconds, people who aren't interdisciplinary, whose research is extremely clear and very popular or whatever it may be, can't hardly explain their research agenda in 60 seconds. So having that visual helps you to capture that.
Yeah, that's so important. And I thank you for sharing that with us, Dr. Young. I think that really manifests the relevance of having that visual, like Dr. Evans was talking about, so that you can go into a room with a committee and say, listen, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I can bring to the table. This is where I see myself, and this is how we can help each other. So brilliant example there, Dr. Young. I think we have time for one more question before we end our webinar. Brooke, do you have that question?
Yeah, so a couple different people were asking about contacting search committees prior to or after interviews and kind of wondered, is it appropriate to reach out to them ahead of time? Is it appropriate to follow up and send thank you cards or a thank you email or ask for feedback if you didn't get the job? What do you all think about that contact with the search committee prior or after interviewing?
Yeah, that's a little bit of the logistics of just following up. Any thoughts there from our panelists? Go ahead, Dr. Visco.
I mean, I so I think that you're welcome to do it. I don't know if they're going to get back to you. I've definitely asked one or two universities like, hey, blah 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 blah, and I've never heard back from them. So I think that a lot of the times it's just like, well, you didn't get the position, and we're moving on, and they don't really want to deal with why you didn't or things of that ilk. It could and it could be a number of things. It could be you just weren't the right fit. It could be that they didn't like the way you answered a question, or they thought you would answer it a different way and you didn't, so forth and so on. So I don't really have a perfect answer, but a lot of times from my experience, I don't know about the rest of the panel members, but from my experience, I haven't got information back from anyone that's asked. So that's all I have to say.
Okay. Anybody else want to go ahead, Dr. Evans?
I think that usually in your call for the position, there's usually a contact number. And I think if there's a question that you have about, especially if it would mean a move for your family, or if there's something that just needs clarification within the search call, I think it's really appropriate to call that contact number or contact email. I did get a few in this last search that we had questions. They were more general, so it was okay to answer, I think. And I always relied on my human resources person to kind of let me know, how much, what is appropriate to say. And because a big thing when you are part of a search committee is to make sure that it's equitable across for all candidates. And so questions could be asked, and then I would check and see that it was appropriate to answer. But so I would say that if it's a kind of a high stakes question for you in applying for the position, I'm not sure that there would be a disadvantage to at least reaching out.
Okay. So reaching out. What about following up, like sending that card and saying, hey, thank you for your consideration. I'm available for questions if you all have any addition. Does that help anything, or is that just a nice gesture that you can do? What's your experience with that?
I would say that the first part of the question, like before, during the application, as long as it's intentional and meaningful, sometimes I think people will ask questions just to get their name out there, like it's going to advance their name in the pool of candidates. It will not do that in any shape, form. If anything, it may be viewed as a nuisance if you have someone real rigid. But for the most part, it's not going to really do anything. And I wouldn't expect a response, especially if it's something that you're asking them a question that you could have found out yourself, right? Because then people are like, why don't people read? Or, why would you ask them something so simple? If you're serious about this, you should have, looked that up yourself. But as far as following up after like a Skype interview, I would always say it's a good idea to send at least the search committee chair a thank you and ask them to please extend the thank you to the rest of the committee, or email the committee and just tell them thank you individually. I would keep it short. I would not solicit a response like, do you know when I would hear back? I wouldn't put anything in there that would warrant their response and or further inquiry. I would just leave it as a nice thank you. As far as after a job search or a job talk when you go on campus, which, by the way, I hope there's time to talk about COVID, because a lot of this is going to be entirely different. I mean, entirely different amidst COVID. But after the job talk, I would send thank you notes to basically most people that you interacted with. And you open it up, you put something specific. I enjoyed learning about that, we both have whatever, and from this small town. And thank you again for being so hospitable during my time on campus. The end. And I'll send for like my own job searches, if I'm on campus, I'll send anywhere between 10 and 20 of those thank you emails to different people. And don't underestimate the students, the administrative assistants, the people who are really the thread of the department. So yeah.
Wow. What wonderful advice. Follow up not just with the main committee members, but also the people who hold the department together. I think there's a lot to be said for that. Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Young and Dr. Evans and Dr. Visco. Michelle, did you have anything you wanted to add on that one?
Well, not too much, because the places that I did apply to, they kind of let me know, we don't want you. No, I'm kidding. But they did. I didn't really have to write anything to them. Only one didn't say anything, but the other ones kind of just, let me know.
Sure. Okay. Well, this that was our final question from the audience, and I'm fresh out of questions. You all covered them in one way or another, so I thank you. And on behalf of AERA Division C Graduate Student Council, we thank you for your participation, especially to our panelists, but most of all, our attendees. We do this for you. We see this as such an important opportunity to engage with people who are not just in the field, but who have already navigated this academic job market reality. We would also like to extend a special thank you to our AERA Division C, the faculty members who are a member of it, and the other members who are engaged in AERA every day. Just a quick reminder, please don't forget that we do have an event coming up December 3rd, and that will be our next webinar. And that will be Dr. Ray Pastore, and he will be giving an overview of gamification, what gamification is, how you can integrate it into your classroom when you're teaching in the virtual learning environment. And again, that's going to be December 3rd. And feel free to look him up online. He has a really phenomenal website where he's involved in esports over at UNCW. If you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our information in the AERA Division C is on our Division C's website. Pending any questions or comments from our panelists, I appreciate you, and we'll stand by if there are any. Thank you all so much. Have a great evening.